There are two kinds of endings, the ones you see coming and the ones you realize you chose years ago. The night my family shut the door on me, the air felt colder than it should have been for late spring. I stood on my son's porch with a small box in my hands. Nothing fancy, just a simple gift I'd wrapped myself because I didn't trust anyone else to touch it. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting a tired yellow circle on the welcome mat that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I could hear a TV inside, faint laughter, the kind that used to spill out of my own living room when Evelyn would joke and the kids would groan and pretend they weren't smiling. Then the door opened only as wide as the chain allowed, and I saw my son's face. Older now, sharper around the eyes, a man who looked at me like I was a stranger who happened to know his name. "Dad?" he said, not warm, not angry, worse than both. "Certain. I drove over. I started, and my voice did that thin thing it does when it knows it's about to lose. It's your birthday week." I thought maybe. He didn't glance at the box. He didn't ask how I'd been. He didn't even ask why I was there, because he already knew. He leaned closer to the crack of the door and lowered his voice like there were little ears nearby, like kindness had become a safety rule. "You can't do this," he said. "Not here." I felt my throat tighten. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said, which was what people say when trouble is the only thing they've brought for years. "I just want a minute. I just want to talk." He shook his head once, slow, like he'd practiced this in the mirror. "You already chose, Dad," he said. "A long time ago." Behind him, someone called his name, soft, patient, the voice of a life that continued without me. He didn't answer them. He kept his eyes on mine. "Please," I said, and the word tasted like a confession. "Tell your sister I'm sorry. Tell Mom." His jaw tightened at that, and for a heartbeat I saw the boy he used to be, the one who would have run to Evelyn when his feelings got too big. "Don't," he said. "Don't put that on me." The chain stayed. The gap stayed. The message was complete. I nodded because that's what you do when you're out of options and still too proud to collapse. I turned away and walked down the steps like each one was a year I couldn't get back. In my truck, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and stared at the street number until it blurred, until the porch light became just another star I couldn't reach. The drive home was only a few miles, but it felt like crossing a state line into a place where nobody was waiting. When I unlocked my front door, the house greeted me with silence so loud it sounded like judgment. I set the unopened gift on the kitchen table and noticed, for the first time in weeks, the dust outline where a framed family photo used to sit. Evelyn had taken it when she left. Or maybe she took it long before she ever walked out, and I just didn't notice because I was busy convincing myself everything was fine. I don't know what made me open the drawer under the phone. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the way my son said chose, like the word was a verdict. That's where I found it. A worn notebook with a soft blue cover, corners frayed, the kind Evelyn loved because it looked ordinary enough to hide in plain sight. My life diary, she'd written on the first page in careful letters. I'd seen it before. I'd even teased her once, told her nobody would care about our boring little routines. I pulled it out, sat at the table, and opened to the bookmark she'd left like she knew this night would happen. The first sentence hit me harder than any shout ever could. "If you're reading this, George, it means you finally lost them." My hands started to shake, not from age, not from cold, but from recognition, because some part of me had always known the price was coming. I turned the page, and there it was, underlined twice, as if she wanted the words to be impossible to misread. "This diary doesn't tell our story. It exposes the choice that cost you your family." The paper smelled like Evelyn's pantry, like cinnamon sticks kept too long in a glass jar, like receipts, and old letters, and the kind of quiet effort nobody applauds. I read the first lines again, hoping the words would soften if I stared long enough, but they only sharpened. My fingers traced the slight indentation of her handwriting, as if I could feel the pressure she used when she wrote a sentence she meant to survive me. The kitchen clock ticked on, steady and indifferent, and for a moment I could almost pretend I was waiting for her to walk in from the laundry room and say I was being dramatic. But the hallway stayed dark, and the only voice in the house was her ink. I turned the page, and she had dated it in the top corner, years back, like she was building a record instead of a memory. "You will tell yourself you did not have a choice," she wrote. "That is how you will sleep. That is how you will keep smiling in family photos." But you always had a choice. My throat tightened because I could hear her saying it in that calm tone that used to make me feel safe and exposed at the same time. Evelyn was never loud. She did not slam doors. She did not throw things. She did something worse to a man like me. She looked at the truth until it flinched. The next lines pulled me backward, not into the night my son shut me out, but into the beginning, when I still believed my life was a straight road and good intentions were a guarantee. She wrote about a summer evening in 1978, when I picked her up in a used Ford that smelled like vinyl and gas station air freshener, and I was so nervous my hands left damp prints on the steering wheel. George tried to play it cool, she wrote, but he could not stop checking the mirror like he was afraid someone would see what he wanted. I almost laughed, and the sound caught in my chest like it did not belong in this house anymore. She remembered everything, down to the radio song, down to the way I opened her door too fast and bumped my elbow on the frame. She wrote about the diner off Route 9 where we split a slice of pie because we were saving money, and how I insisted on paying anyway because pride was already part of my personality even then. He wanted to be the man who provides, she wrote. He wanted that more than he wanted to be understood. I sat back in my chair, staring at the faded wood grain of the table, thinking about how much I loved that version of myself, the young man who believed effort was the same thing as character. The diary moved through our early years in quick, bright snapshots. Our first apartment with the crooked blinds, the hand-me-down couch, the winter we kept the thermostat low and wore sweaters inside. She described the day we brought our first baby home, how my hands shook as I tightened the car seat straps, how I drove 30 miles per hour the whole way because I was terrified of doing anything wrong. George looked like someone entrusted with a miracle, she wrote. He did not know he would one day treat trust like it was optional. That line made my stomach drop. I turned the page too quickly and almost tore it, like my hands were trying to outrun the sentence. She wrote about our children growing up, about school plays and little league games, about Evelyn clipping coupons and me working late, about the routines that felt ordinary but were actually the glue holding us together. We were not perfect, she wrote, but we were real. And then she began listing small moments that I barely remembered, but she had stored like evidence. The time I changed the subject when she asked about a work trip, the time I snapped at her for worrying, the time I smiled at a neighbor while my eyes avoided hers. You did not become cruel, she wrote. You became careful. I swallowed hard. Careful sounded like a compliment in my head. In her writing, it sounded like a warning label. On the next page, her handwriting pressed darker, as if the pen had to fight its way across the paper. There was a week, she wrote, when you started coming home with your shoulders tight, like you were carrying something you did not want to share. You would kiss me, ask about dinner, watch the news, and pretend you were present. But your mind was somewhere else, and I could feel it from across the room. My eyes stung, not from tears yet, but from the kind of clarity that burns. She ended the entry with one sentence, simple enough to be merciful, sharp enough to cut anyway. That is when the choice began, long before you admitted it existed. The next entry began with a detail so ordinary it would have meant nothing to anyone else. George started buying the expensive orange juice. I frowned when I read it, because in my mind, the big moments were the ones that mattered, not the groceries. But Evelyn's writing had always been like that. She noticed the small shifts first, the tiny upgrades people make when they are trying to compensate for something they do not want to name. She wrote that it happened right after I got the call about the promotion I had been chasing for years. It should have been a celebration. We should have gone out, toasted with cheap champagne, laughed about finally catching a break. Instead, I came home with a smile that did not reach my eyes, set my briefcase down, and asked what was for dinner like nothing had changed. Evelyn wrote, he was trying to act normal because he believed normal was a shield. I kept reading, and my jaw tightened the way it used to when she asked a question I did not want to answer. She described that season of our life like a weather report. The kids were busy, the bills were steady, the house needed repairs, and I was working more hours than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was responsible. George said he was doing it for us, she wrote. And I wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than imagining the alternative. Then she introduced a name I had not seen on paper in years, and my stomach reacted before my mind did. I met Curtis Hale at the company picnic, she wrote. He shook my hand like he already owned the room. Curtis. He was a regional manager back then, the kind of man who never looked rushed because other people rushed for him. He had a watch that glinted when he gestured and a laugh that made people lean in, like it was an invitation. Evelyn wrote that Curtis complimented our kids, complimented our home, complimented my work ethic, and then leaned closer and said, "George is going places." On the drive home from that picnic, Evelyn asked why my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I told her I was tired. Evelyn wrote, "He was not tired. He was afraid." The entry shifted to the Monday after, when I left before sunrise and came home after the porch light was already on. She described how I ate dinner standing at the counter, eyes on my phone, as if the screen might give me permission to relax. "He started treating our life like an interruption," she wrote, "and his real life like something that waited on the other side of a closed office door." I wanted to argue with the page. I wanted to say I was providing, I was protecting, I was building something for our future. But her words had a patience that made my excuses sound childish even in my own head. Then came the moment she called the beginning of the pressure. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was an envelope. A certified letter arrived on a Thursday, she wrote. I brought it inside like it was nothing, because I did not know it was the first stone. The letter was about an audit, a review, a routine inquiry, the kind of language that pretends it is harmless while it quietly rearranges your sleep. Evelyn wrote that I read it twice, then folded it neatly and put it in my briefcase like hiding it would change what it meant. That night, I barely touched my food. Evelyn asked what was wrong. I said it was just paperwork. She wrote, "He used the word just like it was a bandage." Over the next few days, the phone calls started, always during dinner, always during the kids' homework, always when real life demanded I be present. I stepped into the hallway to take them, lowering my voice as if secrecy was the same thing as professionalism. Evelyn wrote that she did not press me at first. She waited, because she believed marriage was a place where honesty returned on its own. But the honesty did not return. The silence grew, and with it, my need to control every detail. George began measuring everything, she wrote. Miles driven, dollars spent, minutes late. He could not measure trust, so he stopped talking about it. Then she wrote the sentence that made my chest feel too small for my lungs. Curtis offered George away to make the problem disappear, and that is when George started confusing relief with righteousness. My fingers tightened around the diary. The kitchen felt farther away, like I was reading from a room across town. Evelyn ended the entry with a line that sat on the page like a warning sign you ignore because it slows you down. The choice did not arrive as a fork in the road. It arrived as a shortcut, and George loved shortcuts when they saved his pride. I kept reading because stopping would have meant admitting she was right, and I had spent most of my life treating admission like surrender. Evelyn's next entry was dated 2 weeks after the certified letter, and she began with a sentence that sounded almost gentle until you felt the blade inside it. There are problems you solve, and there are problems you hide. She wrote that the house looked the same on the outside that month. The lawn still got cut on Saturdays. The trash still went out on Tuesdays. The kids still complained about homework and asked what was for dinner. I still kissed her hello when I walked in, still asked how her day was, still nodded at the right times like a man performing normalcy. But she noticed my habits shift. She noticed I started taking showers later, as if I needed extra time alone where no one could ask questions. She noticed I stopped leaving my phone on the counter and began keeping it in my pocket, screen down, like it carried a secret that could fall out if it faced the light. He started guarding information like it was money, she wrote, and he did not notice he was stealing from the only account that mattered. She described a Tuesday night when I came home with a paper folder tucked under my arm, the corners bent from being gripped too tightly. I told her it was nothing, just internal compliance forms, standard stuff, boring stuff. Evelyn wrote, when George says boring, it means he wants me to look away. She said she did not push that night. She made chicken, helped our daughter with a science project, reminded our son to pack his gym clothes. She waited for me to speak on my own, because she believed a good marriage did not require interrogation. Then she wrote about the first time Curtis Hale came to our driveway, not in a company car, not with a logo, just his own shiny sedan, too clean for a man who claimed he was always busy. Curtis smiled at me like we were old friends and asked if we could talk in the garage. I remember that part. I remember the way Evelyn stood at the kitchen window, pretending to wipe the counter while her eyes tracked every movement. I told her not to worry. I told her it was business. Evelyn wrote, George used the word business like it was supposed to make me feel small for caring. In the garage, Curtis spoke softly, like he was offering comfort. He said the review could become a bigger issue if certain numbers did not line up, and the wrong kind of attention could hurt everyone on the team. He said people lose jobs over misunderstandings. He said it would be a shame if my record got stained over something that could be cleaned up. Curtis did not threaten me. He did not have to. He simply painted two futures and let my fear choose the color. Evelyn wrote about what happened after Curtis left. I walked into the house and tried to act normal, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway where the kids were. She asked what he wanted. I told her it was handled. She asked what that meant. I said it meant I took care of it. Evelyn wrote, he thought taking care of it meant making it quiet. She described how she lowered her voice and asked, George, did you do something you cannot explain to me? And I, the man who prided himself on being honest, replied with a sentence so polished it might as well have been rehearsed. I did what I had to do. Evelyn wrote that she stared at me for a long moment, then asked a question that made my stomach turn even now. Did you have to do it? Or did you want to? She wrote that I did not answer right away. I sighed, looked past her, and asked if the kids had finished their homework. That was my gift, my specialty, my most destructive skill, changing the subject without looking guilty. Evelyn wrote, that was the first time I felt alone with him sitting right in front of me. The next day, she found the folder, not by snooping through drawers, not by breaking into anything, but because I had left it on the passenger seat of my own car like a man who believes consequences only happen to other people. Evelyn wrote that she opened it and saw the neat lines, the signatures, the language that sounded official and harmless, but the numbers did not make sense. There were pages that should have been there that were missing. There was a line item corrected in a way that looked like it had been corrected for a reason. She did not need to be an accountant to know when something had been arranged. Evelyn wrote, I could not prove what George did. I could only feel the shape of it. She confronted me that night after dinner, when the kids were upstairs. She did not accuse me of a crime. She accused me of a betrayal. Tell me the truth, she wrote, she said, because I cannot love a story you keep editing. And then she wrote the sentence that made my hands go cold around the diary. George looked at me, and for the first time, he chose silence on purpose. Evelyn's next entry was written in a steadier hand, which scared me more than anger ever could. Silence is not neutral, she wrote. Silence is a decision. She described how she waited for me to say something after dinner, how she rinsed the plates slower than usual, how she kept glancing toward the stairs to make sure the kids stayed in their rooms. She did not want them to hear us. She still cared about protecting the family image even while the foundation was cracking under her feet. She wrote that when I finally spoke, it was not the truth. It was a strategy. I told her she was overthinking. I told her she did not understand how corporate reviews worked. I told her Curtis Hale was helping me protect our team. I used words like procedure and compliance and standard practice, because if I wrapped my choices in official language, they sounded less personal. Evelyn wrote, George tried to hide behind vocabulary, but I married the man, not the dictionary. Then she listed the details she had noticed, item by item, like she was building a case file in her own home. The folder had a date stamp that did not match the meeting I told her about. The pages were numbered, but there was a gap, like someone removed a section on purpose. A spreadsheet column had been adjusted by a few percentage points, not enough to alarm a casual glance, but enough to change the story the numbers told. A signature line at the bottom was mine, and the ink looked fresh, as if it had been signed in a hurry. She wrote that she did not know exactly what it meant, but she knew what it felt like, a husband rearranging reality and asking his wife to call it responsibility. I asked him a simple question, she wrote. Did you sign something that was not true? She wrote that I stared at the kitchen floor for a long moment, and in my head I was not thinking about honesty. I was thinking about consequences. I was thinking about the mortgage, the braces we were paying off, the college fund we were still pretending would cover everything. I was thinking about how quickly the world can judge a man for one mistake while ignoring the 100 things he did right. I told myself it was not a lie. It was a correction. It was a protective adjustment. I told myself nobody got hurt. Evelyn wrote, when George said nobody got hurt, he meant he did not want to count the kind of hurt he caused. She described how I finally answered her question without answering it. It is complicated, I said. It is not what you think. Evelyn wrote. Those were the words that turned my stomach. Not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar. Every secret sounds the same when it is trying to survive. She wrote that she asked again, slower, like you do when you are hoping the other person will realize this is the last exit before the highway. George, she wrote, she said, I am not asking you to explain the whole world. I am asking you to tell me if you crossed a line. And I did what I always did when the truth felt expensive. I moved the conversation to the future. I talked about how close I was to the promotion, how the raise would help, how the benefits would be better, how the company was watching everything, how Curtis knew the system, how I could not afford to be naive. Evelyn wrote. George called honesty naive. That is when I realized he was already practicing his defense. She wrote that she did not yell. She did not cry. She simply walked to the refrigerator, opened it, stared inside as if cold air might give her an answer, then closed it and turned back to me. So you signed it, she wrote, she said. You will not say it, but you signed it. Evelyn wrote that I opened my mouth and then shut it again, because a confession would make it real. She wrote. He thought if he never spoke the truth out loud, the truth would stay smaller. The next morning, she wrote, she went into the garage and checked the car again. She did not want to be suspicious. She did not want to be the kind of wife who hunted. But love, when it is threatened, starts looking for oxygen wherever it can find it. She found a receipt tucked into the folder pocket, thin and crumpled, from a downtown hotel cafe. Not a room charge, not anything scandalous, just 2 coffees and a muffin, purchased on a day I told her I had been in back-to-back meetings across town. Evelyn wrote. It was not about the muffin. It was about the lie being casual. She wrote that she circled the date in the diary and then did something she had never done in our marriage. She compared my story to the calendar on the wall. Curtis Hale had scheduled a review prep meeting that same morning. I had said it ran late. The cafe was 20 miles in the other direction. The math did not work, and neither did my face when she held the receipt out to me that night. Evelyn wrote. George did not look surprised that I found it. He looked angry that I did. Then she wrote the sentence that made my chest feel hollow. That was when I understood the choice was not only what he signed. The choice was who he was willing to become to keep it hidden. The next pages were dated within the same week, and Evelyn's handwriting changed in a way I had never seen before. Not messy, not frantic, just tighter, as if every letter had to squeeze past a lump in her throat. When I held the receipt out, she wrote, George looked at me like I had committed the crime. She described how I took it from her hand, stared at it too long, then set it down on the counter as if it might burn a hole through the laminate. I told her she was making a big deal out of nothing. I told her it was coffee, not a confession. I told her the meeting moved locations, that Curtis suggested a quieter spot to talk, that I did not want to bother her with boring details. Evelyn wrote, he said boring again, and I realized he would rather call me dramatic than call himself dishonest. She wrote that she did not argue about the cafe. She argued about the pattern. She asked why I had stopped telling her where I was. She asked why I was guarding my phone like it was classified. She asked why the folder had gaps. She asked why my stories required so many little explanations to hold them up. I remember that night more clearly than I want to. I remember the way my pride rose like a shield, not to protect the family, but to protect my image of myself. Evelyn wrote that she looked at me and said, George, I can handle a problem. I cannot handle being lied to in my own kitchen. She wrote that my face hardened when she said kitchen, because to me the kitchen was supposed to be safe, not a courtroom. I told her she was accusing me without proof. I told her she did not understand the pressures at work. I told her Curtis was saving my career. I told her my career was saving our family. And then Evelyn wrote the sentence that made my hands go numb as I read it. He kept saying our family, but he never once asked what I needed to feel safe. She wrote that she finally said it plainly, without drama, without tears, like she was offering me one last clean path. Tell me what you signed, she wrote, she said. Tell me what you changed. Tell me what Curtis is asking from you. If you tell me the truth tonight, we can face it together. She wrote that I stood there in silence, and in that silence, I made the same calculation I always made. How much truth can I give without losing control? Evelyn wrote, George wanted a truth that did not cost him anything. That is not how truth works. She wrote that I gave her a half-truth, the kind that sounds responsible when you say it confidently. I admitted there had been a reclassification of numbers. I admitted Curtis told me it was a common fix to align reports before an audit. I admitted I signed the revised form. But I insisted it was not wrong, just interpreted differently. I insisted it protected jobs. I insisted it would blow over. Evelyn wrote. He confessed like a man applying for forgiveness, not like a man accepting responsibility. Then came the part one did not expect, the part that made the room around me feel like it tilted. Evelyn wrote. I did not learn this first. Our son did. I stopped breathing for a second when I read that, because in my mind I had kept the children out of it. I had convinced myself I was a master at separation. Work over here, family over there, like a fence could stop what leaks through cracks. Evelyn wrote that a few days before the receipt, she had been folding laundry in the living room when our son, 16 at the time, came downstairs for a glass of water. He was supposed to be asleep. He paused near the hallway, and she noticed his shoulders tense the way mine used to. He asked me if you were in trouble, she wrote. Not casually, not like a teenager asking about money, like a young man who had heard something and could not unhear it. Evelyn wrote that she tried to play dumb. She asked what he meant. He hesitated, then said he heard me in the garage with Curtis. He had come down for a charger and stopped when he heard voices. He did not understand all the words, but he understood enough. He heard my voice low and fast. He heard Curtis say, "This is how it is done." He heard me say, "I do not want my name on anything that looks bad." He heard Curtis laugh and say, "Your name will look great when you get that title." Evelyn wrote, our son heard his father bargain with his integrity like it was a coupon. She wrote that our son asked if we were going to lose the house. He asked if I was going to get fired. He asked if people would show up at the door. Evelyn wrote that she promised him no because she needed him to sleep. But she also told him something I had not heard her say. She told him she would make sure the truth came out in our home, even if it did not come out anywhere else. Evelyn wrote, I said it to comfort him, but the words became a vow. She wrote that our son started watching me after that. Not like a child watches a hero, but like a person watches a stranger. He watched what time I came home. He watched where I placed my phone. He watched how I answered Evelyn's questions. Evelyn wrote, he learned a lesson that month, and it was not about money. It was about how easily a man can say he loves his family while choosing himself. My throat burned as I read, because I remembered how our son became quieter, how he started spending more time in his room, how he stopped asking me for help with homework and began asking his coach or his friends. I told myself it was normal teenage distance. Evelyn wrote, George called it a phase. I called it the first goodbye. Then she described the ultimatum. She never spoke like an ultimatum because Evelyn did not believe in threats. She believed in boundaries. I gave George one simple condition, she wrote. Not to punish him, but to save us. She wrote that she asked me to do 3 things. Tell her the full truth without hiding behind corporate language. Refuse Curtis's shortcut, even if it cost the promotion, and schedule a meeting with a real compliance officer to correct what had been altered. Evelyn wrote, I told him we would tighten our belts. We would pause vacations. We would cancel streaming services. I did not care. I would rather eat the cheapest peanut butter in the grocery store than feed my children a lie. She wrote that I stared at her, shocked not by her plan, but by the fact that she thought I could survive the embarrassment. And then she wrote the line that hit like a door locking from the inside. George did not say no. He said later. Later was the most dangerous word in our house, because it sounded like patience when it was really avoidance. Evelyn wrote that after I said it, the air between us changed in a way no apology could fully reverse. He did not refuse me, she wrote. He postponed me. The next day I left for work earlier than usual, not because I had more to do, but because the kitchen felt too honest. At the office, Curtis Hale greeted me like nothing was wrong. He clapped me on the shoulder, asked how the family was, and smiled as if my marriage were a casual topic like the weather. Evelyn wrote, Curtis always smiled. It was his way of reminding George that this was supposed to feel normal. She described the weeks that followed as a slow drift, not a sudden break. I kept saying I would fix it. I kept saying I just needed to get through this quarter, through this review, through this one more meeting. Evelyn wrote, George treated truth like a project plan. But truth is not a spreadsheet. It does not wait politely for the right quarter. She wrote that I started bringing home little peace offerings, her favorite tea, a new throw blanket, a dinner from the place she liked. I acted as if kindness could substitute for honesty, as if being thoughtful could erase being evasive. He bought comfort, she wrote, because he could not afford courage. Our son stayed quiet. Too quiet. He stopped asking me for rides. He stopped mentioning school the way he used to. When I tried to joke with him, he smiled politely, like a customer service representative. Evelyn wrote, he was grieving a father who was still alive. Then she wrote about the moment I thought I had won, the moment that should have been our relief. Curtis called me into his office and told me the review was done. The numbers were aligned. The attention had moved elsewhere. My promotion was back on track. Curtis said, see, I told you. This is how you take care of your people. Evelyn wrote that I came home that night lighter, almost cheerful, and I expected the house to meet my mood like it always had. I expected Evelyn to relax when she saw I was safe. I expected my son to stop watching me like I was unpredictable. Instead, Evelyn stood at the sink with her hands in soapy water and did not turn around when I walked in. She did not ask how my day was. She did not ask what I wanted for dinner. She simply said, so it worked. Evelyn wrote, he heard relief in my voice. There was none. There was only confirmation. She wrote that I tried to spin it as a victory. I told her we could breathe now. I told her I had protected the family. I told her she could stop worrying. She dried her hands slowly, turned, and looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has memorized your routines. What did it cost? She asked, and I answered with the line that would haunt us. Nothing. Nobody got hurt. Evelyn wrote, that is when I knew George would say anything to keep his story clean. She wrote that she reminded me of the condition she gave me. Tell the full truth. Refuse the shortcut. Correct what was altered. She asked me if I had done any of it. I told her not yet. I told her the timing was not right. I told her stirring things up now would be foolish. Evelyn wrote, he called it timing. I called it fear. Then she described the moment she stopped negotiating. She did not scream. She did not threaten. She simply asked, if our son grows up and does this to his family, will you call it providing? I remember snapping at that. I remember saying it was not the same. I remember saying she was being unfair. Evelyn wrote, George hated comparisons because comparisons showed patterns. She wrote that our son came downstairs at the worst possible moment, drawn by the tension the way kids always are, even when you think you are hiding it. He stood at the end of the hallway in sweatpants and a faded school t-shirt, holding a glass of water, and he did not look surprised. He looked tired. Evelyn wrote, he did not interrupt. He just listened like someone confirming what he already knew. She wrote that I saw him and immediately tried to soften my voice, tried to wrap the conversation up, tried to protect him from hearing anything messy. But it was too late. He had already heard enough, not just that night, but over months of watching. Evelyn wrote that she turned to him and said, gently, go back upstairs, honey. He did not move at first. He looked at me and asked a question so simple it made everything else feel stupid. Did you lie to Mom? I remember the heat rising in my face. I remember wanting to answer with a speech, with context, with excuses. Evelyn wrote, George opened his mouth to give our son a lesson in rationalization. And then she wrote the line that explained why my son's voice on that porch years later sounded so final. George did not say yes. He did not say no. He said, it is complicated. And our son learned that complicated was just another word for dishonest. The entry ended with Evelyn writing, that night, I did not leave the house. But something left the marriage, and it did not come back. The next entry began a month later, and Evelyn wrote as if she had stopped hoping I would become a different man overnight. After our son asked his question, she wrote, I stopped asking George questions that required courage to answer. She described how the house became quieter, not because we fought less, but because she no longer chased the truth. Mornings turned into polite logistics. Who needed a ride? What time practice ended? Which bill was due? I mistook that calm for healing. I thought if the volume went down, the damage was shrinking. Evelyn wrote, George loves quiet because it lets him pretend. She wrote that our son began leaving early, coming home late, spending weekends at friends' houses more often, not in rebellion, but in retreat. He still did his chores. He still said please and thank you. He just stopped offering me his life. He did not slam doors, she wrote. He simply closed them softly, one by one. I kept working. The promotion came through. The paycheck improved. The benefits got better. I came home with the kind of pride I thought a father was supposed to feel, and I tried to share it like it was a gift. Evelyn wrote, George held out a better life like it could replace a better heart. She wrote that I suggested a vacation, maybe a trip that was about 800 miles away, somewhere warm, somewhere with clean hotels and ocean views, as if distance could rinse off what happened. She wrote that I offered to pay for new furniture, new paint, a remodeled kitchen. I offered comfort the way some people offer flowers. At a funeral, beautiful, late, and missing the point. Evelyn wrote, he wanted to renovate the house because he could not renovate his honesty. Then she described the day she gave me what she called my last fair chance. It was not dramatic. It was a Saturday afternoon with groceries spread across the counter, the kids out, the sunlight bright enough to make everything look simple. She placed my coffee mug in front of me and sat down across the table like we were about to discuss weekend plans. I am not leaving today, she wrote, she said. But I am also not living like this anymore. Evelyn wrote that she told me she needed one thing, and it was not a promise. It was not flowers. It was not another speech about providing. She needed me to do the hard, boring, humiliating work of making things right. She told me to request a formal review with compliance and put everything on the table, including Curtis Hale's involvement and the altered documents. She told me to accept whatever consequences came, even if it meant losing my title, losing my raise, losing the respect of people who only respected me because they believed a polished version of my story. She wrote, I told him I would stand beside him if he stood inside the truth. She wrote that I looked at her and felt cornered, not because she was wrong, but because she was asking me to sacrifice the one thing I had worshipped my whole life, appearing competent. I told her we could not risk it. I told her it could ruin everything. I told her Curtis had connections, that stirring it up could backfire. Evelyn wrote, George spoke as if his fear was wisdom. She wrote that she asked, quietly, do you hear yourself? You are more afraid of embarrassment than you are afraid of teaching our children that lying works. I remember scoffing. I remember saying she was exaggerating. I remember saying plenty of people make small adjustments, and it is not the end of the world. Evelyn wrote, he called it small again, and I realized he was shrinking his own conscience because it was easier than changing. Then she wrote about the moment she stopped negotiating with my timeline. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a printed list of dates and notes she had kept, not to attack me, but to keep herself sane. A receipt, a meeting date, a phone call log she wrote down when she heard my voice in the hallway. She was not playing detective for sport. She was documenting because reality had started slipping in my presence. Evelyn wrote, I told him this is what it feels like to love a man who edits the truth. She wrote that I stared at the envelope and felt anger rising, not because she was wrong, but because her evidence made my excuses feel weak. I asked her why she was doing this to me. Evelyn wrote, that was the sentence I will never forget. Not what he did at work. Not the papers. The sentence. She wrote that she answered, I am not doing this to you, George. You did this to us. She wrote that I stood up, pushed my chair back, and paced the kitchen like movement could create an escape hatch. I told her I needed time. I told her to trust me. Evelyn wrote, trust was the one thing he kept demanding after he spent it all. She wrote that she looked at me for a long time and then said, softly, if you choose later again, you are choosing a life without me. And then she wrote the final line of the entry, underlined once, calm as a verdict. George heard me. George understood me. And George still waited. The last entry I read from Evelyn that night did not explode like a threat. It settled like dust, quiet and unavoidable. He still waited, she wrote. And then she wrote about what waiting looks like when you are married to a man who mistakes delay for control. She wrote that the days after her warning felt strangely normal on the surface. I still went to work. She still made dinner. The kids still moved through the house like guests who did not want to disturb the furniture. But underneath, something had shifted from hoping to preparing. I began to live two lives, she wrote. One where I acted like we were fine, and one where I made peace with what I already knew. She wrote about the small things she stopped doing without announcing it. She stopped folding my shirts the way I liked. She stopped asking if I wanted seconds. She stopped texting me reminders during the day, not out of spite, but because those little acts required a softness she could not force anymore. Love is not only a feeling, she wrote. It is also an investment, and I could not keep investing in a man who would not tell the truth. Then she wrote about our son again, and my stomach tightened before my eyes even finished the sentence. He stopped calling you dad in his stories, she wrote. He started calling you him. She described how he spoke about me at the dinner table when I was in the room, careful, vague, emotionally distant, like he was practicing what it would feel like when I was not part of his life. She wrote that he was not cruel. He was cautious. He learned caution from you, she wrote, and he learned it too well. In the diary, she described a moment I barely remembered, a Tuesday evening when I came home and found her sitting with a notebook open, not the diary, but a plain legal pad. I asked what she was doing. She said she was making a list. I joked, trying to lighten it, and asked if it was groceries. She looked at me and said, "It is everything that has to be true for me to stay." Evelyn wrote, "I wanted to give him a map because he kept pretending he was lost." The list was simple. Admit what happened without minimizing it. Stop hiding behind Curtis. Correct what was wrong, even if it hurt. Speak to our children directly and answer their questions without using the word complicated. She wrote that when I saw the list, I felt something like panic because the list was not about emotions. It was about actions. Actions meant consequences. And I, the man who loved solutions, suddenly hated the only solution that mattered. She wrote, "He stared at the list like it was an invoice." That night, Evelyn wrote, "I told her I would handle it soon. I told her I needed to choose the right moment. I told her I was protecting the family from chaos." Evelyn wrote, "He still believed chaos was worse than dishonesty." Then she described the morning she made her own choice. It was not dramatic. It was not a shouting match. It was a quiet Saturday when the sun came through the blinds and dust floated in the light like tiny truths you cannot catch. She packed a small bag, not because she wanted to punish me, but because she needed to breathe in a space where her reality was not questioned. She left a note on the counter that said, "I will not compete with your fear." She wrote, "I did not want to leave. I wanted him to come back. But I did not run after her. I did not call compliance. I did not confess. I did what I always did. I waited, believing time would fix what honesty refused to touch." Evelyn ended the entry with a sentence that explained everything about my life now, about the porch light, the chained door, my son's voice. "George thinks the choice was the paper he signed," she wrote. "But the choice was every day after, when he decided comfort mattered more than truth."